Hi, Susie.
Hi,
How are
Rabbi.
you?
How are you?
Good, thanks.
Hi, Susie.
Hi, Maddie. How you
Hi,
doing?
Rabbi. I'm good.
Hi,
Hi,
Yehudi.
Hoodie.
Oh, shalom, Rabbi Papa. Shalom, Susu. And hello, Maddie. I saw you out of the corner of my eye a minute ago.
Hello.
There you are. I just heard from your hubby about the new Zionist Haggadah. I'm strongly supportive of the project. The Haggadah, as we have it, is not nearly as Zionist as it ought to be. It's more of a Gullish book than an Eretz Israel book. And if
I
somebody
haven't
wants
looked at it.
pep that up a little bit with a little more, Zionist oomph, I think that would be a very good idea.
Hmm.
Show me a picture of it in the office.
He's got it somewhere. He's going through it.
What's the name of the Haggadah?
Good question. Where is it?
But it sounds very promising idea, especially right now. You know how I take out the last verse of Aramio Bedavi? Vayevienu ha'aretz hazos, vayitin lanu, vayevienu ha'makom hazeh, vayitin lanu et ha'aretz hazos, eretz zavat chalav u'dvash. Well, the text does not quote that line, even though it immediately follows the last line, but it does quote. Okay? That's a deliberate snub. You never know that the whole purpose of this is to get to Eretz Israel, except for that last line that was added on much later, after Dayenu, which is not even part of the original Haggadah, so it's all part of a later edition.
The name of the Haggadah is the Zion Haggadah, How to Teach. Chinit. A friend of ours, his brother-in-law is a gastroenterologist, and he wrote this.
Oh, cool.
Marvin Chinitz, MD.
Well, I'm sure getting involved with those guys these days.
What?
I'm sure getting involved with those guys these days. I'm under one's care. I'm under a surgeon's care. One of my chavrutas is a gastroenterologist. And now I'm going to have a Zionist Haggadah from school in other words.
Hi, Rabbi Zucker. How you doing?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Ricky.
Hello.
Yeah, well, having a GI guy work on the Haggadah means he's really going to get excited, I guess. All right.
I sent it to you. I sent you what it looks like.
Rabbi, I just want to tell you that I have to leave early.
So does Ricky.
Yeah.
All right. Is Thursday not a good time for everybody?
It's okay for me.
It's good for me when my doctor doesn't change my appointments.
Well, that's also true. Okay, let's get into it since some people have to leave early. So we're up to Parashat Truma. The second half of the book of Shemot, of course, is focused on the Mishkan. And we have the next two parshiot, the various instructions for building the Mishkan. Then we have, of course, an incident that interrupts the whole discussion of the Mishkan, and that, of course, is the Egel Masecha, the molten calf, or as we call it, the golden calf. And then the last two parshiot, Vayakel Pekude, are, of course, the actual construction of the Mishkan. And as we've been emphasizing and talking about Shabbat, the instructions for the Mishkan appear in 6 sections. The seventh one is the law for Shabbat. And then just before we get the actual construction, we once again have the law for Shabbat. We'll come back to that, but we've discussed that. So again, I'm going to be thinking a little bit about what is the idea of the Mishkan. We come to this and all of its details. There are a lot of questions that can be raised. Certainly the Torah gives so much detail on the Mishkan, and yet, when we come to the Beit HaMikdash, there's not as much information on its construction. There's a lot, but not quite as much as we feel when we read both all the instructions and then the actual construction for the Mishkan. And of course, when we think of the fact that Israel, that the traditions of the Tanakh come together in exile, although perhaps already when Israel has returned to from Babylonian exile, there's still a question, why was this so important that they spend so much detail on it? I think one simple answer is the Mishkan was important. And also, so many of the compilers and editors and teachers of the biblical materials were Kohanim. And this would obviously be a very important topic to them. And these are among the traditions that they preserved and developed over the years that they compiled and edited all of this material. It becomes a bit more of a serious question when you get to the Mishnah, when you have 1/6 of the Mishnah, one of the orders of the Mishnah, Kodashim, deals entirely with the various rules of the sacrifice and offerings and the care of the altar and the binyan itself, not to mention other sections within the Mishnah. And by the time the Mishnah was compiled, certainly, there was really not much of a chance of the Beit HaMikdash being rebuilt, because it was the Beit HaMikdash was already destroyed in 70. Bar Kokhba failed, the Bar Kokhba revolt, and you
But
have...
the hope was still there.
The hope is still there, although, after Bar Kokhba, the
It
Romans
wasn't very, there wasn't much I like
plowed
to
over,
stand
and
on.
Jews were not allowed in Yerushalayim. So,
Rabbi Papi, I think we have to understand that at the time that the Mishnah was compiled, the hope really was a lot more alive, say, than it was when Vayikra Rabbah was.
right.
Just a couple of simple ways that you can see this. The very first Mishnah starts with, how do you know when it's time to say Kriya Shema? You
Right.
watch the Kohanim come in to eat their Truma. Well, at this point, the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed for 150 years. Why are people still watching this? Because people are still doing it. In other words, people have not yet lost hope. They did eventually lose hope, but that didn't really come until the Christians took over in the Byzantine period. So
And even then, one of the Roman emperors, there was some hope that he would rebuild it.
Well, that was 2 years.
But
That was before the Christianization. But there was still there was a rebellion late in the 5th century. So
that was also sponsored by Shomronim.
It was squashed very
What
quickly.
I'm saying is, by the time you get to Vayikra Rabbah, it's clear that they're no longer taking this stuff literally anymore. They're basically now interpreting everything metaphorically. We're in the Mishnah and the Sifra, and and not just the Mishnah in the beginning, but the Mishnah and Seder Karashim. It's very clear that they're not talking about something that I don't think is messianic. They're thinking about something that's been temporarily interrupted. The way, let's say, Divrei Amim thinks about the destruction of the first temple. Koresh is back, so we'll go back to the second temple. It's just not quite the same thing in 200 as it is in 400 or 450.
Absolutely. What I'm just saying, my point is that, it's amazing how powerful and important these things were, even as these institutions were lost in the past to some extent. Now, again, there was probably more of a hope, for the priestly writers or editors of the Torah, that, when they were being allowed to return to Eretz Yisrael and they were allowed to rebuild their temple. But still, there's a lot of stuff there that, but again, it shows the importance and the concern that people had for it, and we should explore why this is so important religiously. So we're going to take a look pretty much at the line Vasuli Mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Let them make me a holy shrine, Mikdash, that I may dwell amidst them. And then I was totally unaware of this piyut, but in looking at some of the commentators on Sfaria, I saw that there is a piyut that was done by, or at least described to Sadia Gaon on the mitzvot, and one of them talks about building the Mishkan, and he has here Cheder Mishkan, Ma Nichbad, the chamber of the Mishkan, how glorious. Ashrei ayin ra'atu b'machaneh. Happy is the eye that sees it in the camp.
Rabbi Poppy, this line is lifted straight out of the 51st chapter of Ben Sira. That's how it got into the Piyutim.
Okay.
You know, it went from there to Yossi ben Yossi, and then from there down the whole line of Paitanic priests that went straight into the Byzantine period.
Okay, I can't
But
say
the line itself originates from Second Temple times.
Okay, but even so, it's still a beautiful line.
It sure is.
And
we say it to the present day.
Yeah. So we have here a picture of the tabernacle, so you know what the different parts are. And you can take a look in Sarna's commentary exploring Exodus, how you can divide this rectangle into two squares. At the center of the square on the right is the altar. Actually, it doesn't appear that way in this particular picture. And then at the center of, if you divide the rectangle of the holy place, that is this part here, and you can be divided into two squares, and at the center of the square on the left is the Aron HaKodesh. So, but that's just, to get a sense of what's in there. You have a table with bread, you have the altar of incense, you have here the outer altar. They said the brazen altar, that's the altar of bronze. That's where they perform the sacrifices and offerings. And the laver, of course, is where the Kohanim wash. You have light. And if you will, we'll come back to it. So moving on, we've looked at some of this stuff before, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. Yes? Did somebody have a question? Go ahead. No. Okay. So just a quote from great scholar of religion, Jonathan Smith, when he talks about, then again, we've looked at this, ritual is first and foremost a mode of paying attention. It is a process for marking interest. It is the recognition of this fundamental characteristic of ritual that most sharply distinguishes our understanding from that of the reformers, with their all too easy equation of ritual with blind and thoughtless habit. It is this characteristic as well that explains the role of place as a fundamental component of ritual. Place as a fundamental component of ritual, place directs attention. So, I think that's just an important statement as we look at religion, not to just assume, as some people do, it's just meaningless, it is arbitrary. It can be, but there's purpose behind ritual, and if it's to direct attention, then the use of a specific place is going to particularly draw your attention. And such a preliminary understanding of ritual and its relation to place is best illustrated by the case of built ritual environments, most especially crafted constructions such as temples. When one enters a temple, one enters marked off space in which, at least in principle, nothing is accidental. Everything at least potentially demands attention. The temple serves as a focusing lens, establishing the possibility of significance by directing attention, by requiring the perception of difference. And I think that applies very well to the Mishkan. Now, here you have a place that is marked off from the rest of the camp. And certain people could go into certain places. Things are marked off. It's not arbitrary. And it really has to direct our attention. Everything can direct our attention. And we feel that as we're reading about all the materials that go into the building of the Mishkan and all of the colors that go into the Mishkan. So, I mean, you can't miss it. And certainly as you walk in, you also can't miss it. Okay, so let's take a look at, what, missing something here, what is the Mishkan? Let's take a look at just a couple of traditional mafarshim on what's happening here. It says, "V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." Who would like to begin reading with Rashi?
I will.
Okay, thanks, Susie.
Let them make me a holy shrine. Let them make to my name a place of holiness.
Okay, and read one more. Also read Ibn Ezra.
Let them make, it is called a holy place because it is the indwelling of the holy name.
Okay, any comments? We've looked at some of these before, but any reactions, responses to these comments? What, according to Rashi and Ibn Ezra, is the purpose of, or, what is the Mishkan?
A place for God to dwell.
Yeah. And now, of course,
that's questionable because it's the dwelling place of God's name.
exactly.
And
Oh,
that's
wait a
not
minute.
necessarily the same thing as God.
But
Yeah.
in Sefer Shemot and Vayikra and Bamidbar, and probably in Sefer Yechezkel, it really does mean the dwelling place for God himself or herself. It's only in the Deuteronomistic corpus that you get the impression that it's
Right.
only a symbolic, thing that essentially is his name is listed on the building. That's a big issue in Tanakh, Rabbi Zucker. That's not one that you can just,
No, I know. I'm currently reading Sommer's book on the bodies of God. That's why I'm more attuned to it.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I think that to some extent these commentaries also reflect medieval Jewish thinking, which is often very uncomfortable with any kind of anthropomorphism. So they're going to pick up on what is already an ambiguity, a tension, however you want to look at it within the biblical text, that certainly, and in, it's not so ambiguous in Devarim, that what's dwelling there is God's name. So you don't really think of God dwelling in the Mishkan.
Again, Adrabah, and I think that's partly what Yudi is alluding to, that the priestly concept, it would seem that, at least early along, that the kavod, which is, for lack of a better term, the more or less body, dwells above the
presence.
Mishkan. That's its footstool.
Right. Yeah, which is certainly we'll come to how they view the kaporet and the kruvim on the kaporet, the cover for the ark. But also, if you take a look at the Mishkan here, it is an apartment. You've got the table for the food. That's the altar. You got the shower, the laver. Although that's for the Kohanim, because you can't just walk into God's place. You have to take off your shoes and et cetera, et cetera. And you have the food again, the bread. You have the light. You have your lamp with the menorah. You have the air wick, the altar of incense. Although that's also, again, is connected with just before the Holy of Holies. It says the veil, if you can read it. Sorry, I did not increase this to the appropriate size. I really apologize.
But one thing is conspicuously missing, and that's the bed. When the Shunammite makes a apartment for Elisha, it's Bita Shulchan Kisei Umenorah.
Yeah. But here you still, but also this is, we're talking about God. the king.
Well, that's
So,
it.
you know,
Well,
you
that's
really have a
precisely
throne
the-
here, and this is the private space. You don't just walk in there. You've got the incense, which creates a cloud. So it's not just a cloud that is above the Mishkan or covering the Mishkan, which, as we've talked about, why Moshe cannot go in after it's built. But also you have the parochet, the veil. So, you know, it's like the inner part of the apartment. So there is an element of God living there. It is called Mishkan, the indwelling. That's, I mean, I like that translation. But, you know, we have to realize that Jewish tradition is very, very, and we'll come to some other things. Uh,
Well,
They're a little ambiguous
it's
about
marked by what you're saying, Jewish tradition versus biblical. I mean, earlier thought was probably God was there.
Yeah.
Once you get past the Beit HaMikdash, it's a completely different, certainly after the second temple, the thought is very, very different.
but again, we'll see even in biblical
But
material.
the word shochein,
The words
in
are
the
the same. Yeah.
earliest place we have it, Uhu shochein be'elonei mamrei ha'emori,
Mhm.
already basically means had settled down there at least for the duration. Okay, it does not mean permanent settlement, but it certainly does mean pretty long-term, you know, commitment to a settlement.
Right.
Okay.
Because it's not unmovable. You can move, but you know, as a practical, it's clearly meant to be moved. Okay, but just the same, it basically means to settle down.
Mhm. So
That's
let's
the word.
continue looking at how our Mefarshim, or some of our Mefarshim, look at this. So, you want to go on, Susie? Rabbeinu Bachya?
Scripture calls the Mishkan holy place, Mikdash, because it was sanctified by the presence of the Shekhinah. It is also possible to say that it is because it is along the model of the heavenly temple.
Okay, so a couple of things. And again, he's really, you know, using that medieval stepping away from the anthropological by saying it was sanctified by the presence of the Shekhinah. Which is a little bit, that's how they translate it. It's really the resting of the Shekhinah. So, you know, there's a sense that God's presence is in there. That doesn't mean God totally, but, you know, already, certainly for the medievals, the notion of Shekhinah, and you could even say, to some extent, for biblical authors, and again, I'm not, you know, I don't know what
It
Summers
also
has to
has the
say
meaning
about.
of stationed. Like, for example, by Ashkein Mikedem Ligan Aiden et Takruvim.
Right.
That means he stationed them there, you
Right.
know? You know, so that's another meaning. Like it works even today in English. You know, a station is a place where you stop, but it's not a place that cannot be, it doesn't have the permanence of a full-blown building that's never intended to be moved.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a typo here. I didn't run the and also, you know, even when it talks about Kavod Hashem, you know, which is the cloud, you know, there's not the sense that that is all of God, but that's just symbolizing God's presence. Now, in the Middle Ages, of course, as you get to medieval Jewish thinkers like Sadia, and then, of course, later the Kabbalists as well, you know, the kavod is kind of an intermediary. Intermediate may not be the word, but to some extent, there's representation, but not the divine itself. Now, the other thing he adds here is, why is it also called Mikdash? You know, one, it was the presence of God, but why is it also possibly called the Mikdash?
It's a reflection of the
Shekhinah.
Mikdash Mala,
Yes,
the heavenly.
the heavenly model. We have, of course, within the description of the building of the Mishkan, that God shows Moshe a tavnit, a plan. And our tradition will later understand that there is not just a Beit HaMikdash al haaretz on the earth, but also a heavenly Beit HaMikdash. And by the way, they are also, the commentator is also dealing with the fact that we call this structure the Mishkan, and yet here it's also called Mikdash. They are different words, and they may imply some different things. And Mishkan certainly implies indwelling, a dwelling, even, just a station on the way. But then Rabbeinu Bechayai goes on to another, quoting the Midrash, another way of looking at the Mishkan, which I think is rather important. Susie, you want to go on?
Sure. In the Midrash, Shemo Rabbah, let them make, the Blessed Holy One said to Israel, you are my flock and I am your shepherd. You are my flock, Ezekiel. As for you, my flock, I am your shepherd. Psalms 80. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel. Appear, you who are enthroned on the cherubim. Make a dwelling for your shepherd that he come and shepherd you. You are
Okay. Before we go on, this is, a sin. Well, yeah, let's finish it off.
You are my vineyard, as it is said, for a vineyard of God, Tzivaot, is the house is the house of Israel, and I am its keeper. As it is said, look, the keeper of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Make a sukkah for the keeper so that he will come and watch over you.
Yeah, now we know the sukkah really represents the structures that were built by farmers, or in this case, people, well, yeah, caring for a vineyard, to be there to watch, or to be there during harvest season. So in looking at these two descriptions in the Midrash that Rabbeinu Bachya brings in, shepherd and keeper of the vineyard, and it goes on. You can see I didn't bring it all in, but there are, he's also compared to a parent. What is the role of the Mishkan here? What does the Mishkan represent? And what is it about? I mean, before we're talking about the presence of God is there, might be along the, it's a holy place, but why does Rabbeinu Bachya bring in these examples in talking about God and Israel? I mean, what are the examples demonstrating?
Reinforcing the relationship.
We could hypothesize what he's thinking. For example, perhaps he's thinking that the relationship is something on a sort of a marriage, which is called by him kiddushin.
Right.
In other words, I'm not saying he's saying that b'feirush, but if knowing where Bachi is coming from and knowing where he's about, that wouldn't in the least bit surprise me.
Right, and I have to say that is bringing out, and you use the word that's very clear. We're talking about relationship. This is about the relationship between God and Israel. And, I read the Midrash, and of course, it probably reminds us of the famous piyut that we recite on the Yamim Noraim.
Yeah.
Where we talk about the different ways, this is God, this is Israel, it's about relationship. And the presence of God in the Mishkan, so the Mishkan it's not just representing the presence of God, but the presence of God is really about the relationship between God and Israel. That, which also may point to why these traditions, the tradition about the Mishkan in the Torahitic traditions, or the the traditions in the Mishnah about the Beit HaMikdash. Why, even after these institutions are no longer in existence, they are still so powerful. Because we think about God's relationship with us. And as we know, so many elements of the Beit HaMikdash are then, by the rabbis, translated into our daily practice. And we saw the laver, the Kohanim have to bathe themselves, they have to wash. Well, so too, before we eat bread, we wash. It's not a hygienic washing, not that I have any objection to that. We should wash our hands before eating. But it's a ritual that we are eating our bread, as it were, in purity. We're imitating the Kohanim. We add salt to our bread, imitating the salt added to the sacrifices. The person leading the Seder traditionally wears a kittel, just like a Kohen. So, the Neusner talks about the Pharisees, and I'm not arguing for Neusner, but just that he calls it a table fellowship sect, that, the table becomes the altar. And so many elements that were part of the temple are brought into daily living. Rabbi Zucker, you were going to say something?
Mikdash Ma'at.
Mikdash Ma'at, right. Thank you. The little sanctuary, the home is the Mikdash Ma'at. And again, on the relationship, here are two more commentaries by Rashbam and Chizkuni. We can read them together because they're pretty much saying the same thing. Who would like to continue? Any volunteers?
I can read.
Thank you, Ricky.
Holy Shrine, the language and meeting place where God would be sanctified and encounter them, from which he would address the Israelites. I will keep my appointment, no ADT, with the children of Israel.
Yeah, so it's it's also, we know that sometimes there's confusion between the Mishkan and the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. And here, this is where God and human beings meet. And then, we have a very explicit verse, Monoadati Shama Livnei Yisrael. I will keep my appointment with the children of Israel. Noadati, like Moed. And then very similarly, Chizkuni, go ahead.
Let them make me a holy shrine, a meeting place, no head, as consecrate yourselves for tomorrow. And similarly, it is written, I will keep my appointment, no ADT, with the children of Israel.
Okay, so here too, there's an emphasis on relationship. That this is kind of like a meeting point between God and the people of Israel, or at least between God and Moshe, much more directly. And in the various discussions in the anthropologists about the temples and sacred places, they are often seen as portals, between realms, between heaven and earth, or between earth and the nether regions. So now let's kind of put this a little bit more here to, again, we have this remarkable notion, Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. We have this sacred place that people can't just approach at any time. And it becomes a meeting point between the human being and God, whether God is really there or just God's presence is there. But go on with Sarna's commentary.
I think somebody else should read. My voice is going.
Okay. Any volunteers?
I'll read.
Thanks. Maddie?
Dwell. Careful analysis of the language used here is essential for a proper understanding of the underlying concept and role of the sanctuary. First, the text speaks of God dwelling not in it, that is in the sanctuary, but among them, that is among the people of Israel. Then the verb to dwell is not the common Hebrew stem. How do I say that?
Yud Shin
Yud
Vav.
Shin Vav.
Yushin
like
Vav.
Yoshev,
Yeah,
Yashav.
right.
It's invade.
But the rarer Shin Kaf
Kaf.
Nun,
Mhm.
which has a different connotation. This verb conveys the idea of temporary lodging in a tent and characterizes the nomadic style of life. That is why the structure is called a mishkan, and why the verbal form is frequently used together with ohel, the common word for a tent, and in connection with nomads.
Okay, before you go on, just a little bit of a point. Sarna and others try and point out that, there likely was a Mishkan because, this was that, first of all, we know there were 10 shrines in the ancient world at this time. And so, there's always an argument, what's the relationship between the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash? Some scholars believe that these sections about the Mishkan are really kind of almost anti-Beit HaMikdash. But I think that the Mishkan was still very much a living presence for them, certainly during the period of the Shoftim. God is seen as dwelling in the Mishkan, and David brings the ark to Jerusalem, but he doesn't yet build the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, some scholars believe that the Mishkan itself was inside the Beit HaMikdash. I'm not arguing whether that's the case or not, just and even in talking about the kingdom of David and Shlomo, there are a lot of scholars that question the whole, picture of the Davidic and the Solomonic kingdoms, because they say the archaeological evidence is somewhat ambiguous regarding the power of these kingdoms, certainly for David. But the Mishkan would be very appropriate. One scholar has suggested that, well, of course, there's not a lot of large structures to be found as proof of David's kingdom, because they were a semi-nomadic people. They were not yet developed. They were living in tents. David himself is a little bit on the move. So it's just, I think we have to
Rabbi Poppy, you could argue a little bit against that line of thought
Oh yeah,
also.
absolutely. I'm just
In chapter 18 of Yehoshua clearly is placing this whole structure with all its opportunities into the city of Shiloh.
Right.
And that's where it's intended to stay and does stay until the Philistines destroy the city. It
Mhm.
always starts moving around after that. Not only that, it already has walls at this point. It's not any longer a resemblance of what it was when it was traveling around in the desert. It's pretty much been in the same spot for well over 100 years, and it's looked upon as a fixture of some permanence, as it is presented in the beginning of the book of Samuel.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that people always question the Ohel, but the idea of an Ohel is not so far-fetched. Yes, I mean, at a certain point, it becomes located in a particular place.
Those are the dissimilitude at that point. You understand where I'm going?
Yeah. Mhm.
Once we go into houses, we stop calling the place where Hashem dwells an Ohel, except in poetic literature.
Right.
It's intended to recreate the distant past.
Right. Okay.
If archaeologically we're a little bit off, because in Iron One, which starts about 1200, you start to have the 4-room house as the normal dwelling of the Israelites. They're only in
Oh, it
small
wasn't
villages and they're
the book of
small. But the Beit
Iron One,
HaMikdash is 10th century.
Wait a minute, but the
It's
book of
archaeologically,
Samuel.
it's a little bit off.
Oh, hold it. But the book of Judges and the first book of Samuel do represent the beginnings of Iron One.
Yeah.
So that's that you're not really off.
Anyway, but let's go on. I mean, that's I was just
it presents archaeologically and for the time periods, it doesn't mesh, is what I'm saying.
What doesn't mesh with what?
Book of Judges and Yehoshua and Shoftim would be in Iron One.
Right,
But
so,
but the archaeological evidence seems to be a little bit different.
So we're just talking about how the
Settlement begins in
archaeologists
houses.
define the time period.
We're not in tents until the time of David.
so I thought you said the four-room house precedes the time of David.
No, the yes, the four-room house precedes David. It starts with iron one.
All right, let's let this go. Rather than
Yeah.
looking about tents.
Okay,
And
so
that's
go
well,
on here. Yeah.
The noun Mishkan is often employed in wait, I just lost it. Did you move
Sorry.
it?
Yeah, I just wanted to move it so you can read a little bit.
Okay. Employed in synonymous parallelism with Ohel and the other designations of the wilderness, tabernacle are the tent of the pact and the tent of meeting. Thus, the sanctuary is not meant to be understood literally as God's abode, as are other such institutions in the pagan world. Rather, it functions to make perceptible and tangible the conception of God's immanence, that is, of the indwelling of the divine presence in the camp of Israel, to which the people may orient their hearts and minds. A post-biblical extension of this usage of the verb shin kuf nun is the Hebrew term shekhinah for the divine presence. The tabernacle and its furnishings are conceived either as earthly replicas of celestial archetypes or as constructions based upon divinely given blueprints and pictorial representations.
Yeah, let's
Both-
just take a look. Wait, let's just take a look at the footnote here. You know, this is we already saw a reflection of this in one of the Mefarshim, and you've got it in many Midrashim. And here, this is just the one case. I use a lot of materials from Professor Robert Harris from JTS, Robbie Harris. He did a Torah from JTS on the Mishkan, and he brings in this quote from the Zohar, which really captures the idea of the heavenly blueprint. Just read this. When God
sought to create the earthly world, he did so on the basis of the heavenly world, bending world with world. This was accomplished through three powers: wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, where the three words are used in connection with God creating the world.
Yeah, so that's he's just explaining that these words are being used, chachma, bina, and da'at in the Hebrew, come from Proverbs, where they're used to describe creation or God's creation. Go on.
Through these same three powers was the tabernacle erected. Exodus, where God is said to inspire Bezalel, the tabernacle's craftsman, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Thus, all secrets concerning the creation of the universe are hidden in the commands concerning the erection of the tabernacle.
Yeah, so that's the Zohar trying to show the importance, but still a really wonderful, sense that there is a heavenly archetype to the celestial, as Sarna puts it here, to the Beit HaMikdash, that, there is this divine plan. Both notions, go on back here with Sarna.
Where? Both notions are found elsewhere in the Bible. According to the chronicler's account of the building of Solomon's temple, David had received the specifications from God. Ezekiel's detailed vision of the reconstructed temple in Jerusalem is likewise said to have been received by the prophet while standing on a very high mountain, as is told in Ezekiel. The notion of a celestial temple, a sort of cosmic sanctuary, is clearly conveyed in the vision of Isaiah.
Yeah, that's the one we just read as the Haftarah for Parashat Yitro, where Yeshayahu has the vision of God filling the temple and the angels singing Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Go ahead.
Are you convinced, Rabbi Zucker, that that's really talking about the heavenly temple, and the Heichal there is not just the earthly temple 2 blocks away from Yeshayahu's house?
Well, yeah. This
I'm,
is
I'm not at all convinced that that's that what we're talking about is the heavenly.
I also question that,
Yeah,
that
I mean, it's certainly, I mean,
only
I would also question, I would say that it's Isaiah imagining God really filling the temple. It's in a vision. It's not so I don't think it's so clearly conveyed. But I mean, again, I'm just quoting here. I just brought in Sarna's commentary, but it is
yeah, but I
that
think
example is not so good.
That's a stretch on Sarna's part, I think.
I would agree. I'd agree with both of you. Also, this next one is a little bit of a stretch in terms of seeing a heavenly temple. Go on.
Is explicit in Micah, which foresees the Lord coming down from his holy abode, from his dwelling place, to stride upon the heights of the earth. The psalmist, too, declares that the Lord is in his holy palace. The Lord, his throne, is in heaven.
Yeah, so I don't know that they're really talking about a temple. Certainly there's the sense that there is God's abode in the heavens, and part of that is the vision of thrones, of a palace
Yeah,
itself.
like I said, Rabbi Papi, structure as distinguished from a throne is, remember, you really have to go through the Tanakh from one end to the other before you get any kind of real firm idea that there is a temple upstairs, there's a Jerusalem upstairs. The Tanakh itself barely hints at such ideas.
Yeah.
I'm granted they became big stuff in later Judaism, but in the Tanakh itself, there, you have to go through a mind to basically find such ideas. They're really not.
And I think again, as we noted early, the priestly concept was that God was dwelling right above the Mishkan.
What?
It's only the Deuteronomic that God is in heaven all the time.
Yeah. I think it.
Yeah, but that
relatively early. It's certainly
heaven. Let's understand what we're saying here. That God's basic home is in heaven. That nobody doubts that. The issue was whether or not there's some kind of structure in heaven. Okay, that's basically something that I don't think the Tanakh is really prepared to make such a statement. Okay, so we can't say that the earthly temple is modeled upon some type of heavenly structure. Okay, because the Tanakh never really says that.
Yeah, and even when it says that God gives Moshe a tavnit,
that's for the earthly structure.
That's a plan. It's not. Doesn't say that it's tavnit beito. It doesn't say the plan of his house. Here, for of course it's in the midrash that Moshe goes up to heaven.
He gives him a tavnit of the opportunities.
Right. So I think that is 100% correct. That the notion that there is a heavenly temple, Yerushalayim Shel Mala, Beit Mikdash Shel Mala, that's definitely later Judaism, not in the Bible itself. Again, there are all kinds of visions of God being in heaven, but not
not in a structure.
Yeah, not in a structure. But then, what's the significance of the Mishkan? Abarbanel, always comes up with these great questions. Maddie, do you want to go on here? This
First
is
question,
the very beginning of his commentary on the parasha.
First question, why did God, may he be blessed, command the erection of the tabernacle when God said that I may dwell among them, as if God were an object demarcated and limited in space, because God, may he be blessed, is not an object and has no corporeality. So how can he be connected to a place? After all, God may be God may he be himself, spoke these words.
Should be blessed. Sorry.
Whoopsie. The heavens are my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house can you build for me, and what place can serve as my abode? And Solomon also
Just
said
last
regarding
week.
Yeah, right. Mhm.
And Solomon also said regarding the building of the temple, look, the heavens and the highest heavens cannot contain you, much less this house that I have built. These statements contradict one another.
In other words, you can't say that God's dwelling in there. You know, it's very clear from other places that God is well beyond the confines of the Mishkan, and most certainly,
Even beyond the confines of the Beit HaMikdash.
right.
Look at last week's Haftarah. Hashamayim Kasiva Haaretz Hadom Raglai
Yeah,
Ezer Bayat Asher Nuivi Ezer Makom Menucha.
exactly. As Rabbi Zucker mentioned, this was the Haftorah that we read, the Haftorah for
Rosh
Shabbat Rosh
Chodesh.
Chodesh. You know, the opening lines. And then, you know,
But
even
it's also very clear that Abarbanel is post Rambam.
yeah,
Non-corporality, the total non-corporality of God, which biblically, I don't think we can say is established in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's the Rambam's invention.
yeah, yeah. You know, there's
That's why I always say Rambam isn't Judaism.
yeah. One of my teachers, and why am I suddenly blanking on his name? He's at Boston Hebrew College. Don't ask me. Anyway, he argued, I don't know, I totally agree with him, but he argued that much of the Kabbalah is a reaction to Rambam. You know, Rambam, you know, not wanting any kind of corporeality or, you know, picture, and Kabbalah is the other way. They're drawing pictures all the time
Right.
of God. But there was also a very wonderful set of comments here that I think gets at both the anthropological perspective, but as well the theological perspective, the religious perspective in understanding the Mishkans by Stephen Geller, also a professor at the seminary. Would somebody else like to go on, or do you want to continue, Maddie, or does somebody else want to read?
I nominate Carol.
Okay, you're on,
Yeah.
Carol. Can you see it?
Yeah, it's small. It's on my phone, but
Yeah,
hopefully.
that's why I'm asking if you can see it.
Yeah. Now the source of the metallic offerings, both in the case of the golden calf and of the tabernacle, was the precious objects Israel took as spoils from the Egyptians when they left Egypt.
Sorry
So
about
the
these
same
typos.
items. So the
Sorry, I'm
same.
just correcting the typos. So
Okay.
the same items.
So the same items were put to two radically different ends to make the abomination of idolatry and its counter, the sacred shrine and its vessels. The differences between the accounts of the golden calf and buildings of the tabernacle suggest that some important theological points are being made.
Yeah, so this is what we call smichut parshiot, you know, the juxtaposition of different passages. I think there's no question that, you know, there's a point being made here by having the story of the golden calf right smack dab in the middle of all of the details for the Mishkan. Go on.
In contrast to the chaos of the golden calf incident, there is a sense of complete controlled order in the command to build the Mishkan. God is the architect with the plan, the Tavnit, and Moses is to supervise the Malacha, the work of construction, with the staff appointed by God, headed by Bezalel.
Yeah, again, the Malacha, the work of construction, very, very important, because that is the word that's going to be used to describe activities that are not allowed on Shabbat. We talked about that at our study session on Shabbat. Go ahead.
Admittedly, the repetition of the details of construction may prevent the narrative from being in any way dramatic in literary terms, unlike the live violent story of the calf, from its inception to the smashing of the tablets, to the final punishment of the sinners and Moses' impassioned intercession for Israel. But non-drama is precisely the point. The tabernacle represents a created order that replaced chaos. The building of the sacred space was a plan carried out with deliberation.
Yeah, let's just take a look down here. We've seen this before. By Mircea Eliade, since religious man cannot live except in an atmosphere impregnated with the sacred, we must expect to find a large number of techniques for consecrating space, but we must not suppose that it is through his own efforts that man can consecrate a space. In reality, the ritual by which he constructs a sacred space is efficacious in the measure in which it reproduces the work of the gods. To organize space is to repeat the paradigmatic work of the gods. It follows that every construction or fabrication has the cosmogony as the paradigmatic model. In English, the creation of the world becomes the archetype of every creative gesture. And again, Shabbat represents creation. We recall creation. And therefore, what is forbidden on Shabbat?
Anything that was done for the building of the
The
Mishkan.
building of the Mishkan, creative stuff. And we'll come to that in a moment. Go ahead. The initiative.
Where are we? The initiative was divine, and a definitive hierarchy was established to achieve the aim. God, Moses, Bezalel, the offerings of the people. The story of creation in Genesis 1 is also deliberately undramatic, taking the form of an ordered chronological list. In both cases, the form reflects the meaning. Divine order overcomes chaos.
Yeah, so that, certainly, and the footnote just talks about how the rabbis already recognized the clear linguistic connection between the construction of the Mishkan and creation, and just some comments by Rashi from the Talmud. An interesting comment that Robbie Harris brought in his Torah from JTS column points out in a letter, this is at the bottom here, in a letter written in 1926, Franz Rosenzweig, the German Jewish philosopher, educator, and translator, explained regarding the powerful divine speech of chapters 25 to 31, the entire meaning of this vision looks toward the original model of the dwelling created on Sinai in the 6 days of cloudy darkness, to behold which Moses is called up into the clouds on the 7th day, and which is then completed by the people as a human replica of the divine act of creation. Pretty much along the lines of what we've been saying before. And then just to conclude with a comment by Casuto.
In order to understand the significance and purpose of the tabernacle, we must realize that the children of Israel, after they had been privileged to witness the revelation of God on Mount Sinai, were about to journey from there and thus draw away from the site of the theophany.
The appearance of God.
So long as they were encamped in the place, they were conscious of God's nearness. But once they set out on their journey, it seemed to them as though the link had been broken, unless there were in their midst a tangible symbol of God's presence among them. It was the function of the tabernacle, literally dwelling.
Mishkan, tabernacle is a crazy English translation.
Not without reason, therefore, does this section come immediately after the section that describes the making of the covenant at Mount Sinai. The nexus between Israel and the tabernacle is a perpetual extension of the bond that was forged at Sinai between the people and their God. The children of Israel, dwelling in tribal order at every encampment, are able to see from every side of the tabernacle,
From
standing
every
in the
side, the tabernacle.
from every side, the tabernacle standing in the midst of the camp, and the visible presence of the sanctuary proves to them that just as the glory of the Lord dwelt on Mount Sinai, so he dwells in their midst wherever they wander in the wilderness. This is the purpose of Scripture when it states, "And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell in their midst."
Yeah, so it's a portable Sinai.
Mhm.
And in many ways, we've talked about this in the past, that there are different different zones, that all the people can come. Sorry, I'm just going back to the beginning. All the people can come into the outer court, but only the Kohanim could go into the holy place here, and then it will only be Moshe. Or later on, the Kohen Gadol who can go into this very point. And it was raised before, is that, do we have an image of a structure in heaven? Not necessarily. And even here, the sense of God's presence comes from above the Kruvim. These are seen as God's throne. And in fact, the term Kruvim, which has many different interpretations, are often seen as God's throne. There could be something that God sits on. It could be something that God rides in one of the Psalms. Vayirkav al kruv vayaof, he mounted a cherub and flew. They're clearly some type of composite critter. Could be a winged man, but some type of composite critter. Like we think of the angels that, or I should say the beings that were carrying God's chariot in Ezekiel and other places in the Tanakh. So, but all of this is the sense that it's about relationship, the relationship between God and Israel. God is there, God is present. And hence, all of the details of the Mishkan, the emphasis on all the details of the Mishkan. And then we also look at some of this in the past, we'll probably look at it in the future, how later Judaism will find all kinds of religious and moral significance in the details of the Mishkan, because this is, it's the meeting point between God and human beings. The mitzvah is a meeting point between God and human beings. So hence the importance
And
of
altogether, when you think of the call it the furniture of the Torah, of a Torah scroll, it's all too decorated like the Kohanim and part of the Mishkan. So you get a transfer of the Beit HaMikdash into the Torah scroll itself.
Yes.
The continuation of biblical Israel into Torah Judaism.
Yes, and it's in the Aron. We use the same word, Aron.
Yeah.
Ark,
and we use the word Rimon. Pa'amon Zahar.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right
It's all to make the Torah.
Right on. I like that.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely correct. Yes. And that reminded me of something else, but yeah, and well, I mean, even in biblical Israel, that this was not just the tabernacle, but it reached out, both the materials of the tabernacle and those of the high priest were shatnez, wool and linen. And in fact, the tzitzit, which are worn by every Israelite, are wool and linen. So, or could be. So you have, the sense that this is, it's in the past, but it's still very much in the presence, in the life of the Jew. About feeling
Right.
God's
and we still
presence.
have Kohanim, and we still have Leviim. We are very careful to maintain all this structure in some way, shape, or form. We have our Kohanim, we have our Leviim. We set the thing up in such a way that basically immediately reminds us. The only thing I don't see going on in the old days that we do today is kissing everything, but that's
Yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I've quoted before my teacher.
I know what you quoted, Rabbi
Yeah.
Poppy.
Yeah.
It didn't go down very well though, because everybody wants to do it.
Yeah,
You know?
everybody. But I just, I don't know. In Ottawa, people were big mezuzah kissers. No, there's nothing wrong with kissing a mezuzah. If somebody kisses a mezuzah, entering and exiting a room, that's fine. I'm not trying to be mezalzel. I'm not trying to make fun of that.
The
But
Mizzou's not going to accuse you of sexual harassment.
right. I find nothing wrong with kissing the mezuzah, but and there's so many other mitzvot that people are just blatantly ignoring. I just find that a little funny. The same way as that, people who have no idea what's going on in the service will knock over children and little ladies to make sure that they can kiss the Torah. So, but
Maybe I'm being facetious, but maybe that's why God allowed COVID to come so that we'd stop doing it.
although, I'm not so sure it's that unhealthy, but yeah. So just some thoughts to think about as we go through this very dense material of the next 2 weeks of Truma and Tetzaveh, and then once again in Vayakel Pekude, but also thinking about how this whole thing fits together. We have the juxtaposition of Ma'amad Har Sinai and the Mishkan. We have the juxtaposition of the Mishkan and Egel Azahah, the golden calf. That they're messages in the literary structure of the text. So it's I just think this is just wonderful material.
Indeed.
Thank you.
So thank all of you.
Yasher Tov Lecha.
Shabbat Shalom. And
You and Shul.
yeah, take care.
Kol hakavod.
Yeah, let me make sure I know how to get out of all of this.
Yeah.